this was a low-level bug as opposed to a breach, which we've already said, and that
Yeah.
is the difference between a body blow and a fatal event. Human beings survive body blows, businesses survive too. And if we break the event into simple yeses and nos, will CrowdStrike survive? Is the top level question. So with that, I would give that a yes. I think it will survive. It has survived. I think it's going to survive. Will they lose ground to competitors is the next question. And the answer is yes, I think so.
Hey there, and welcome to Stock Club, a podcast brought to you by MyWallSt. I'm Mike, and joining me today is MyWallSt's chief investor, Emmet Savage. Before we get into the show, we have an exclusive offer to our loyal listeners. With the code StockClub20, you can get 20% off across our entire product line here at MyWallSt. That means 20% off Invest or Invest Plus, where you receive our weekly Charging and Fearless newsletter, 10 starter foundation stocks, and our market-beating stock of the month report. 20% off Horizon, our exclusive service where you can invest side by side with our chief investor, Emmet Savage, or 20% off Nexus, our international service dedicated to uncovering hidden gems from around the world, which is currently outpacing the market and returning over 30% on average since its inception. So whatever you're in the market for, we've got you covered with the code StockClub20 at checkout. Now, let's get into today's episode. Emmet, how are we doing?
Good morning, Mike. How are you doing today?
Not too bad. It's the second week in a row now. The Stock Club has a bit of a curse. We talked for 20 minutes about Google buying Wiz last week, and Wiz just came out yesterday and said that it's
Yeah.
a no-go.
Unbelievable. We have the magic touch, the Midas touch. In previous episodes, we joked about the crystal ball, when in fact most of the things we said came true, as opposed to a couple of years where we had a bad run. But I think we've got our magic touch again. You're right. 2 weeks ago, we spoke about the self-driving robo-taxis being announced on
Yeah.
the 8th of August. 2 hours after the show went live, Musk came out and said, no, we're going to hold that for a while. Last week, as you said, there was the whiz piece where we waxed on about the acquisition by Google. And what was it last night? They said, nah, we're just going to IPO. I wonder
We're gonna,
why.
yeah, well, that's what we're gonna get into on this episode. I wonder
Hmm.
if the CrowdStrike outage is affecting their decisions. Do they see a bit of an opportunity?
Can you imagine how fast the founders, the team, the advisors got together in Wiz
Yeah.
on the day of the CrowdStrike disaster? I would say within a New York minute, they were gathered around a table reassessing their strategy
And
because there's
I,
no two ways. Yeah,
and all of them are sitting on like a 1 billion, $2 billion payday.
yeah, yeah.
That's an
Oh, for
expensive
sure.
meeting. Like, fair play to them.
It's an expensive meeting. You're right. I do think, maybe I'm just thinking too small time and too working class or whatever you want to call it. But I think when you've enough, you've enough. And if you've several million in the bank, as those lads already do, and have no debt and have bought the nice big fancy house and a yacht, that they can hold off. They don't need the extra billion. They can wait and make it 5 billion. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And I guess it gets to a point where the money doesn't really matter anymore. It's about the power and the prestige. And that's why all these
Mm.
billionaires turn into raving lunatics on Twitter and all the rest. It becomes it becomes beyond making money. And it's like, oh, I could run the country. I am the next best political commentator. You look at flipping Musk,
Yeah.
obviously, Bill Ackman,
Oh, yeah.
Ray Dalio. Ray Dalio is a raving lunatic. I listened to I listened to his book called The Fund, and it is very damning on just what a strange individual he is.
But you're right. It was only yesterday I was saying to my family how billionaires eventually realize they need to own some media outlets so that their trumpet is as loud as possible and that they can be heard by the masses and in turn influence the agenda that's particular to their beliefs. And whether we're talking about the big obvious one with the purchase of Twitter by Elon Musk, or local Irish entrepreneurs who bought all the newspaper groups, or British entrepreneurs who bought all the British newspaper groups and radio
Yeah.
stations,
Well,
and you see it
Bezos
all over the
bought
world.
the Washington Post as
Washington
well.
Post.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, that's
yeah.
right. I don't think his influence on it has been very pronounced. I'm sure it echoes his politics, but I mean, I don't subscribe to the Washington Post, and Never once has a print issue appeared in my line of sight in Ireland. I don't think it's ever. Maybe in the middle of Eason's on O'Connell Street you can buy it, but I've never read it in the flesh. But what I have gathered about it is that it really was just there as a token purchase because it's such a prestige paper.
Yeah, but like it goes into what you're saying as well of when the money doesn't matter anymore. Now they're looking for the prestige and the power and
Yeah,
the ability to assert their influence over other people and
yeah,
show off their opinions and why they're
yeah.
right. Like we could
And
go
I
into a
actually,
full different podcast about this and all that kind
we
of
could,
chamath, all in podcast and all that as well. But I
oh,
think we
yeah,
better park it here. We're going to talk
yeah.
CrowdStrike, but before we do, you have a sneak peek first.
Oh, I do. Yes, thank you for that reminder. So I'm going to start. One of our Horizon subscribers wrote in recently, and he called it a sneaky peeky, which I thought was great. I preferred the name. It's an augmentation to something already a bit quirky. So this week's sneaky peeky
Sneaky
is
peek.
for a pitch that, it's for a pitch in Horizon, which is going live just after lunchtime today. Lunchtime Ireland, which is around 2 o'clock, 9 o'clock in America. Um, and it's about a business. So this particular stock I've watched for the longest time because it's led by a visionary founder who is leveraging the very best of uh, American practice for disruption in industries. And this individual who has Asian roots has basically gone to the biggest American college, found the best way to build a business, and has launched a business that's tearing through South Korea with a giant brand that everybody over there knows. And they're now moving this winning formula into new markets: Taiwan, Singapore, Malaysia. And together, these new markets have a bigger population than their home turf, where they've absolutely nailed it. And I think it's a wonderful long-term investment that historically looks quite cheap. And it is just, it's if you want to buy a stock that's doing something special outside of home boundaries, which for the sake of this conversation I describe as the United States, this is the one to look at. I think it's a wonderful business. And so there's a 20% off voucher in our show notes. And I think the voucher is Stock Club. But just
Stock
look at the
Club,
show notes, folks.
Stock
If you
Club 20.
Stock Club. Oh, Stock Club 20. Yes. So just go and stick in Stock Club 20. I'm sure we'll put a link to subscribing to Horizon in the show notes, folks. Do it today. Not only are you going to get our best shot at finding 10 baggers, but you are also going to support a business you know and love and hopefully trust.
Perfect. Okay. So yeah, we've mentioned the Microsoft CrowdStrike outage a few times. They're
Mm.
usually we're kind of scraping the bar for stories on this podcast. It depends on the week, but that certainly wasn't the case. We're ignoring some big
Yeah.
stories just because to give this the full coverage. So Friday
Yeah.
morning of last week, Emmett, we opened our phones, turned on the
Hmm.
TV, and found that basically someone turned off the internet. Microsoft
Yeah.
Windows was down. So, can you give a summary of the events that happened between Microsoft and CrowdStrike on Friday and what's happened
I
since?
will, and I'll keep it short, which is uncharacteristic for me. I'll keep it short because it was the most unavoidable news. If somebody's listening to Stock Club, it's not the first thing they've decided to engage with in the last week, and everyone the world over knows roughly what happened. And our regular listeners are aware that CrowdStrike is a cybersecurity firm known for a product called Falcon, which is this cloud-based endpoint protection platform. And endpoint is just fancy industry term for the device the end user is sitting in front of or holding. So your iPhone is an endpoint in a giant piece of technology, a stack of technology out there. So they specialize in endpoint protection. So for those who didn't hear, last week major airlines ground to a halt, flights were cancelled, hospitals had serious challenges accessing electronic health records, which in turn had a knock-on effect with people going in for critical healthcare and treatment. Television stations went offline. Broadcasts were hurt. Services we all know and use suddenly had a variation of the blue screen or 404, whatever it is you want to call it. And the root cause, as you said, was CrowdStrike. And their founding CEO, a guy called George Kurtz, confirmed that it was a technical glitch as opposed to a cyber attack, which is very,
Mhm.
very important when
Very
you're
important distinction
big.
for CrowdStrike, especially if and I know you're going to
Yeah.
expand on this, but
Yeah.
the difference between a vulnerability in CrowdStrike's tech compared to the human error behind this update is a very significant one when we're talking about the future of
Oh,
the
it's
stock
unreal.
and business.
Oh, it's unreal. I mean, it'd be like landing on a desert island and opening a case full of food to find it's full of celery, where you realize, geez, I'm going to consume more calories eating this than surviving. Actually, very, very tangential analogy, but what I'm getting at is
Yeah.
it still does what it's meant. No, no, no. Celery isn't food. It doesn't give you calories. We need to find that analogies that people connect with, and I missed that one as my face goes red. But anyway, anyway, look, moving swiftly on.
Okay.
Today, 6 days later, um, there's still remedial works being carried out because you need the guy. Where's Norman? Norman's the guy with the disk driver with the USB thumb. Like stuff needs to be done at the endpoint. And from an economic impact, I can't find a good estimate about really how much this problem has caused the world. And there's lots of different estimates, but it's very difficult to run a ready reckoner over it. But tens of billions of dollars is the kind of top line. So this was an outage that cost tens of billions of dollars across the world. And I read a very good quote on Saturday in the British newspaper, The Guardian Online, and I have it written here in front of me. It said, just as the pandemic forced us to confront the limitations of the global supply chain that had been created to improve efficiency rather than resilience, this CrowdStrike mistake should trigger a reappraisal of our networked world. And I thought, yeah, that it really is. People who didn't even know CrowdStrike existed in their business are now triggered into reappraising how their tech stack works.
And sorry, I don't know if we covered it because I think it seems obvious, but CrowdStrike updated they sent out an update that basically took Microsoft Windows
Yeah,
offline. I'm not sure if we
correct.
said that
Sorry,
exact part.
there you
Sorry.
go. No, I did not. I did not say. I should have said that. I mean, seriously, it was for me almost so obvious, but the
Yeah.
obvious needs to be said. So those companies that were using Microsoft 365 specifically to run the software where their staff and people do stuff got the blue screen.
Yeah,
And I
exactly.
heard anecdotally from somebody that it was as banal as a kind of a font update. Somebody told me that as in, don't say this to anybody, but so I don't know how true that is, but it was the most softest update, like the most unnecessary update, is what I was told. But the basic bottom line is we all woke up and everything was off air.
Yeah, yeah. And it shows, I think that gives context of how impactful it would be if you consider the
Mm,
range of where Microsoft 365 and Microsoft Windows is across the entire
yeah.
internet. We talked about it. Someone turned the internet off in the morning. But okay, let's talk CrowdStrike because it's a company you're invested in. It's
Mm,
your preferred
mm,
investment in this cybersecurity arms race that's going on. What are your
mm.
personal thoughts on the whole event?
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's a very it's a personal journey because when an earthquake happens, you really have to stand back and assimilate the events in your own specific way. So the first thing that struck me was something I already knew, which is how deeply Falcon is into the world's infrastructure. I mean, it was central to my investment thesis. I knew it was there. I mean, I pitched CrowdStrike in Horizon, and it was up something like 200% the day before this had happened. And just as the way we all walk around, we all know we've a spleen in there inside our body. It's like this biological cybersecurity system inside of us, but nobody thinks about it. You don't walk around going, he's a spleen, she's a spleen, they've a spleen. We don't do it. But suddenly, if everybody's spleen fell out, you'd realize we all have one. So the first thing that struck me was, wow, it really is out there. Because you invest in these businesses and they're almost like a ghost. You know they're there. You're here that you read their quarterly results. You look at it, but suddenly it was omnipresent
This,
and it
this
was
reminds me
laid
of,
bare. And
do you remember last year? Because Cloudflare was always this business, like it's edge computing, it's high tech. But if we were
yeah,
honest with ourselves, no one really knew what it did. And then CrowdStrike
yeah,
had an outage, or not CrowdStrike, Cloudflare had an outage, and
yeah.
like half the websites on the internet were down. And it was like, oh,
That's right. Yeah.
Cloudflare is doing something apparently.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's a very good one. I completely forgotten about that. And that's actually central to where my head went next because people forget. I'd forgotten about Cloudflare's outage, and Cloudflare, I'm quite certain have done well since I haven't looked at them in the last couple of weeks, so it's not a bit of a blank spot. But what we do know is Cloudflare, CrowdStrike, and all these businesses, they have customers everywhere. So on the day I jumped onto the internet to not only see what the CrowdStrike and Microsoft bosses were saying, but to get a read from industry experts because it is a specialist subject. And I found the following tweet from Matthew Prince, who's the CEO of Cloudflare, to be very, very interesting. And just to elaborate on it, Cloudflare and CrowdStrike are competitors specializing in different areas. So I was quite interested to hear what he had to say because, the first reaction is, oh, they're going to make hay. But here's what he said, and I'm going to read out his tweet, um, which was a long one, but give me a second. He goes, here's the scary thing that's likely to happen based on the facts of the day if we don't pay attention. Microsoft, who competes with CrowdStrike, will argue that they should lock all third-party security vendors out of their OS. It's the only way we can be safe, they'll testify before Congress. But lest we forget, Microsoft themselves have their own internal screw up where they potentially let a foreign actor read every customer's email because they failed to adequately secure their session signing keys. We still have no idea how bad the implications of eternal blue are. So pick your position. Today, CrowdStrike messed up and some systems got locked out. That sucks a measurable amount. On the other hand, if Microsoft runs the app and security then they mess up, you'll probably still be able to check your email because their incentive is to fail open. But you'll never know who else could too, not to mention your docs, apps, files, and everything else. Today sucked, but better security isn't consolidated security. It isn't your application provider picking who your security vendor must be. It's open competition across many providers. Because CrowdStrike had a bad day, but the solution is not to standardize on Microsoft. And if we do, then when they've had a bad day, it will make today look like a walk in the park. And I thought that was really, really interesting. Clearly, he jumped on, like, he'd have an incredibly good read on the thinking of Microsoft, and he jumped on to the industry's defense. You could argue, jumped to CrowdStrike's defense. The CEO, I don't think he's the founder, but he's certainly, yeah, he's up there. The CEO of their biggest competitor jumped to their offense. And then I spent some time contemplating how giant businesses are, as a whole, are forgiven huge missteps. There's barely been a mega company out there that we know and love that hasn't had a major F up of some sort
Yeah,
on the road to
this is what I
stardom.
was going to ask as well, because you mentioned
Yeah,
in a piece you put out in Horizon, obviously, about
yeah,
some of the investments you owned. So,
yes.
wait, can you like recite any of those particular inflection points where like the world is on fire and what did
Oh,
you do?
yeah. Oh, just so many of them, like ones that are in our listeners' memory, like Volkswagen emission scandal jumps to mind in 2015, where it became apparent they'd been completely lying through their teeth about emissions in their vehicles. There was one I remember at the time, BP, British Petroleum, as they were once known, the Deepwater Horizon oil spill in 2010. It was absolutely horrific. Anyone who has any care for this beautiful planet of ours was on looking in horror, which is one of the most worst environmental disasters of all time. Johnson and Johnson, it just in the beginning of my memory, I think it was mid 80s, I'm going to say, uh, Tylenol, a brand that's on most people's shelves today, was laced with cyanide. And it was a massive recall, and there was huge public fear. There are so many examples of events with giant brands that we all engage with that were just absolutely horrendous. The Netflix one you mentioned was one that I watched at a front row seat on this because Netflix even back then was still my biggest investment, and they decided to split their service down in two. So you were basically paying $10 a month, I think it was, maybe. So I think it was about $7 a month, and for that $7 a month you could avail of their DVD by post service, which was the lion's share of of the movie distribution business that they're in, and this new streaming Netflix as we know it today. And Reed Hastings, who the prior year had been on the front cover of either Fortune or Time as Business Person of the Year, I forget which one, uh, came out and said, we're splitting the services in two. You can have DVD by post, or you can have the streaming service, but you pay for them separately. And I was on discussion forum for it at the time, and it was exodus. I mean, it was scorched earth. I have never seen a business or a leader take such a strategic misstep. The cancellation rate was off the hook, and the stock price just dropped over a cliff. But what I admired, and the reason Netflix is today one of the greatest companies in the world, is they looked at it and went, "Oh, we shouldn't have done that. Didn't think that was going to happen," and they undid it. And businesses that have founders that come out and go, "Hey, look, we're doing our best, but we shouldn't have done that." I mean, I've done it. I those who subscribe to Horizon know that I'm going to die trying getting this to a place where that service is going to have a 10x return. And I have bought stocks with the best of intention that turned out to be dogs. I've bought some wonderful businesses that are going to go and grow 10, 20, 40, 50 fold. And along the way, I'm going to make apologies because I believe in apologies. And I like leaders to come out and say, really sorry about that. And George Kurtz of CrowdStrike, within 24 hours, issued a very solid apology and made it clear this was a glitch, not a breach. Big difference. And that's kind of where my head went to. I thought, right, okay, big businesses make mistakes. And like in 1990, Apple nearly went bankrupt. Jobs wasn't in the house. He'd gone off doing something else, and they had no innovation, strategic drift. I mean, the amount of businesses that have had way bigger events than CrowdStrike is just it's just unbelievable. And as I think I said in the video I recorded for, excuse me, for Horizon members on the morning the news broke, is that it's almost hard to find an exception to this kind of giant problem. If you look at Disney released things that were a disaster. Ford, it's Toyota, recalled millions of cars that were accelerating on their own. Can you only imagine the effect on human life to a car that accelerates when you hit the brake? But businesses, when they own it, when they own their mistakes, they actually have an ability to slingshot and, I don't want to say, yeah, but better their position, but come out of that trough of disillusionment or trough of mistake or whatever, valley of despair, because they behave with integrity. But what were your thoughts on it, Mike? I mean, this was a big thing. Where did your head go?
Yeah, it's a tough spot because obviously
Mm,
CrowdStrike is a stock we've covered for a long time, and I see week in, week out
mm,
the reputation it has built up in terms of from research companies and award ceremonies, and obviously in its numbers as well. You know, it's clearly outperforming the market, and it's the number one security solution in endpoint security, and beyond that as well. Its platform encapsulates so many other areas of cybersecurity, so it makes it a really easy decision for its customers to basically sack off other vendors and go with them for ancillary needs as well.
mm,
Um, but unfortunately, that reputation has been tarnished by a
mm,
very small human error. Do you know what I mean?
mm,
Like this
mm.
argument is being made in an emotional state because we're very close to the event rather than probably in the
Yeah.
clinical logical place you should be in as an investor. But if you kind of put yourself in the position of the CTO of Microsoft and you have faith in CrowdStrike, you know it's a good product, and you stick with them, and then something happens again, how bad does that make you as an individual look? And that's where
Mm,
I
mm,
think we don't know the damage of this yet. Like
mm,
you just given
mm,
the scale of the
mm. No, we
outage,
don't.
it's going to
Yeah.
follow it's going to follow the company for some time. It has to. Do you know what I mean? You'd expect some form of Congress hearing or Senate meeting. I don't know how they drag the CEOs in to answer for their crimes in that kind of kangaroo court situation. They brought in
Mm,
other CEOs for less. I
mm.
don't know, will it be on the hook for compensation? Are the airlines going to go after them? Do you know, are the airlines? I don't even know if the airlines are forced to pay out for the canceled flights or what's happened there.
Yeah, that's always a debate, isn't it? When a flight is cancelled. I saw a very funny tweet and I couldn't even engage with it because I mean, of all the jobs I can't really giggle at these things, but someone said that they were in admiration of CrowdStrike had achieved 5 years of their environmental and social targets
Yeah.
by grounding
So
every
that's
airplane in the world. Yeah, like they've just basically their green targets have been achieved, their 10-year green targets. But yeah, I don't know if they're gonna have how airlines deal with this. I think the airlines probably got their systems up fairly lively, and that the guy, at home in bed with the USB stick or known how it was brought in fairly fast. I think I'd say most passengers were reaccommodated fairly quickly, but I just don't know
I
what
think I
story
think
is with
most
it.
of them did okay. I think Delta is still suffering from whatever happened, but just in terms of what goes into rebuilding a
Mm,
reputation, for many people, this is the first time they've ever heard of the company CrowdStrike.
mm,
And
yeah.
because of that, it's gone from the face of cybersecurity for people within, say the finance space, the investing space, but also in the tech space. It's kind of this talisman. And now it's
Mm,
in the public masses as a bit of a warning sign, and maybe even a
mm,
bit of a joke, which is tough. And then, so that's one we don't know. And then lastly, just the customers affected in general. They're likely going to be come looking for discounts or reparations or concessions, so
mm,
that'll probably just in a numbers basis hit the company in the coming quarters in terms of, I imagine
yeah.
they're gonna see a dip. So I don't know, honestly. It only happened what 3 or 5 days ago now. The fact that it was not a hack, not a breach, and human error does give a lot of solace, I think. I thought this was really interesting as well when I was reading up on CrowdStrike. I can't remember the article it said, but there is a phenomenon that after a big notorious gun crime incident in the US, sales of guns actually go up. So,
Wow.
so like
It's counterintuitive.
it's counterintuitive to a point, but what could this happen with cybersecurity companies as well? And I think we're
Mm,
going to get into that
mm,
when I get into the elevator pitch later today. But
mm,
the the damage and the scale of this outage from a human error with no malicious intent was so vast. And now imagine bad actors getting in and doing the same. So I think companies have realized how important cybersecurity is because of this as well, even though it was
mm.
at fault in a weird way. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah.
Um, so so yeah, like you can tell by that ramble that I don't really have a clear, concise
Well,
kind
it's
of
hard. Nobody does.
closing thought on
Yeah.
it, but there's a lot of
Mm,
question marks from this, and I just in terms of reputation alone, there'd be a lot of rebuilding. So yeah, I don't know honestly what'll happen with CrowdStrike.
mm, mm. I mean, I think for me, just my bottom line on the whole event was that, this was a low level bug as opposed to a breach, which we've already said, and that
Yeah,
is the difference between a body blow and a fatal event. Human beings survive body blows, businesses survive too. And if we break the event into simple yeses and nos, will CrowdStrike survive? Is the top level question. So with that, I would give that yes. I think it will survive. It has survived. I think it's going to survive. Will they lose ground to competitors? Is the next question. And the answer is yes, I think so. But my feeling is not much. They won't lose much ground and not for too long. And I arrive at that conclusion because I don't think they'll be booted out by many customers as a result of this. And it's quite tricky to assess, but CrowdStrike held about 15% of the security software market in 2023. Microsoft has about 40%. And I think any tender responses on the tables of CIOs this week in big companies who are out to do some kind of cybersecurity upgrade or implementation, any of those tender responses from CrowdStrike this week and probably this quarter and even possibly the quarter after will be thrown in the bin or the trash can, as they say in America, because the CIOs and the chief security officers of big companies, they'll go for the safest bet and to hell with everything else. Trust me on that. Yes, I've seen it too many times in my life. I mean, there's two dimensions when you're sitting in a giant business, and whether you're the CTO or the CIO, Chief Information Officer, or the Chief Security Officer. And the two dimensions to your decisions are one, do the right thing. I mean, that's, I think, the sponsoring thought. And the second is to be seen as doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And, you go into a giant business, and if they're doing an IT outsourcing project and there's some local operation that's filled with the best brains and efficient people and processes and pricing and IBM, if you're in a giant business, you go with IBM because the brand, the label. If you have to sit in front of your CEO and explain why something hasn't gone to plan, you can point at IBM because they're IBM, as opposed to Acme developers down the road in Dunleary or whatever. So I think from this point on, CrowdStrike's QA, or quality assurance, as it's known as in the industry, which is kind of an internal process for making sure the stuff you do meets the standards that should be met before the product goes out the door. I think their QA will be unmatched in the industry. And there's a famous quote from Oscar Wilde's play, The Importance of Being Earnest, where I think everyone knows that to lose one parent may be regarded as a misfortune. To lose both looks like carelessness. Well, I think in this case, to miss one bug would be regarded as an oversight. To miss two will look like negligence. And I don't think, well, certainly you can just imagine the attention that building, the CrowdStrike buildings now, to make sure that this is their first and final misfortune, as Oscar Wilde would have said. And I think finding that inertia will marry forgiveness for the vast, vast majority of existing customers who get over it and realize that it's these things happen, and to change vendors is messy and difficult and all the rest. But the others will move in pretty quick if they're smart. If we're running a cybersecurity company, I can assure you every salesperson on the floor today would be making calls and in the car, because I'm sure they're going to lose some ground, but I think they will recover.
Big time. Big time. Okay.
Right, Mike, let's stop talking about CrowdStrike, because just like so many other subjects, we could just keep going on about it. And let's talk about one that is as familiar to me, actually more familiar to me, and I've mentioned already, which is Netflix. And I thought it'd be good to check in on their earnings. Like everyone knows Netflix, so it needs no introduction. And it is my biggest holding. Maybe neck and neck with Tesla. I haven't checked in recent weeks. So earnings season has kicked off. Let's talk about it. Tell me start with the ads business, Mike. What's going down at Netflix and ads?
Yeah, so before I get into the ads, I'll just run through the numbers real quick. Yeah, and it's like you said, in my mind anyways, we don't really cover banks. So Netflix does kick off earnings season for us, and obviously it's a company very close to MyWallSt too. So it's just worth covering. I know we talk about how earnings reports aren't that important, really. Like we kind of keep an eye on them, and if there's any big moves, we would diagnose. But yeah, it's just kind of tradition that we cover Netflix to kick it off. So in terms of the report, nothing really jumps off the page. I think it comfortably beat expectations. Earnings per share was $4.88. Came in ahead of expectations of $4.74. Revenue of 9.56 billion was ahead of revenue of 9.53 billion expected, and 277.65 million paid memberships versus 274.4 million expected. All right, revenue was up 17% a year. Net income came in at 2.1 billion, up from 1.5 billion for the same period last year. Global subscriptions were up 17% year over year at 8 million new subscribers over the quarter. Free cash flow was down a bit at 1.2 billion for the quarter. Operating margin improved to 27% from 22% last year, and it reduced its total share count by 12 million. And then lastly, we're going to get into it. The ads tier membership grew 34% quarter over quarter. Not year over year, quarter over quarter. So it shows how fast it is moving, even off a low base.
A lot of green traffic lights there. As you rattle through those numbers, basically I think a listener can just put a green, amber, red against each one. Green, 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 green. And a good while ago, we spoke about Netflix's strategy where they weren't going to report certain numbers anymore, was that clearly they'd moved out of the market growth phase and into the maximizing profit per user phase. But in what'd you say, 8 million new customers in the quarter?
8 million new customers. And I think I know it was. Do you remember when I think it was 2022, was it? When it was the first quarter ever that subscribers stagnated and stock fell off a
Yeah,
cliff.
I remember that. Yeah,
Yeah. I hope you remember that. I'd say that was a big
yeah, yeah,
stressful
yeah.
morning to wake up to. But it's an interesting tactic now where it's not their North Star anymore.
Mhm.
But
But
it's
they've got a
also,
casual flex. 8 million new folks. We don't really
yeah.
watch that anymore.
And I think they will end on a high, but I do see them kind of reading the tea leaves a bit when it comes off the momentum
Yeah,
from the password sharing and everything else. They don't want to be judged by that number anymore.
yeah.
And they clearly
No, they
know that
don't.
that's the one thing people are looking out for. So it's
It's a
kind of
fact. It's a
a
fact.
it'll be a tactical omission. I think it starts in 2025. So we got 2 quarters left of subscriber
Okay. All right. I didn't know that.
views.
So
But
the
yeah.
ads number was the one that jumped out at me, which is why I opened and went straight into deep end saying, hey, talk to me about it. So go, let's talk about the ads a service,
Yeah, so
a tier.
it got a lot of attention on the call.
Mm,
So where do I go? So okay, so it announced in May that it's launching its in-house ad tech platform. That's going to be rolled
mm,
out in Canada this year and will get a proper launch next year for certain markets at least. So that's one hiccup, I suppose, that it's trying
mm,
to overcome, we'll say. It had some issues
mm,
there in the past, and it's got no problem in bringing in people for this ad supported tier. I think the problem is come to the monetization of it's not
mm,
satisfying the customers. It has no issue with it satisfying the advertisers. And
mm,
like this is showing up. So in markets where ad supported is available, it accounts for 45% of signups, which is really impressive and clearly where Netflix wants to go. It's said before that it makes more money from an ad supported subscription than a premium subscription. So while it's onboarding customers easily, they still need to figure out their product for advertisers. The in-house platform is going to help that, I believe. It's clearly a point of contention. I think they were way too ambitious when they started out in terms of what they could deliver for advertisers, and it clearly they're kind of walking it back a bit. But yeah, it's still early doors. So here's a quote from the report. Building business from scratch takes time, and coupled with the large size of our subscription revenue, we don't expect advertising to be a primary driver of our revenue growth in 2024 or 2025. Their near-term challenge and medium-term opportunity is that we're scaling faster than our ability to monetize our growing ad inventory. So it's interesting how they've put it as both a positive and a negative because yes, we're really early doors and they have struggled to satisfy the top end of advertisers, but also there's so much opportunity here. You think of the subscription numbers, the amount of ad inventory they have, the reputation they have, the name they have.
mm, mm.
Um, so yeah, in terms of the ad story, it's still very early on, but there's a lot of growth that could come from
Yeah,
that. And I think it's
yeah,
probably gonna push Netflix next stage of revenue growth because Netflix, I think, is always going to see itself as some form of growth company. Do you know what I mean? It's like
yeah,
300 billion
yeah,
quid and it's growing at 17, 18% a year. So
yeah,
that's really where that's where I see anyways the growth coming for the company in the coming years. And it has to do it too because its premium subscriptions just don't work in certain regions. So India is the perfect
yeah.
example of that.
Mm. Well, the world's blind to adverts, as far as I'm concerned. They've been around since the birth of commerce. You look at old pictures of New York or London and ancient photos, and you could see advertising on the side of buildings, and it didn't detract from the aesthetic of the building. And I think the modern incarnation of that as adverts in programming doesn't necessarily detract. If you have a reasonable amount of Zen, I don't think ads hurt your experience. Now in America, they're a little bit. In American TV adverts, they come thick and fast. It's like every few minutes on a TV show. I don't know exactly how Netflix are doing it, but over here in Ireland, there's a platform called RTE Player, which is the Netflix of our national broadcaster, if you like, which is an app on the TV, and they force adverts. And to be honest, you just switch off the sound and look at your phone for a minute. So I think that it is a nice substitute for the other pack where you're going to save a few bucks a month, and I think most households want to do that. So I think it was a stroke of genius. But the real question, I think, Mike, is how did numbers stack up against its competitors? I mean, how is Netflix doing versus all the others?
Yeah, so this is a stark comparison. Um, it's the competition is just not able to keep up at all in terms of they might be able to scale, and we saw that from Disney Plus, but they're not able to scale profitably at all. So since 2019, that was the year when Disney Plus launched and Apple TV launched, Netflix has grown its profits by sevenfold. Yeah, that's nuts. And
Oh, that's amazing.
I don't think the stock has been adequately rewarded for that.
No, it
No.
hasn't. No, it
Yeah.
isn't. I mean, Netflix, it to me is one of those just set it and forget it, buy it, and just leave it there forever stocks. It really
Yeah,
is
well,
like that. What you've
that's
just
easy to
said.
say when that decision came in 2001. Like,
Well, and no, I agree. But as you know, I also recommended it for Horizon, and I
yeah,
think it's probably up about 100 and something%. So I'm not just like sitting here smug because I got it right back then. But I do think when you look at the efficiency of that business and just family debates, we were in a debate last night about what can we cancel because hell, over the years we've subscribed to everything in this house, and it's just a joke. But we were talking about Paramount, and the conversation in our household was Paramount, which is one of the biggest televisual broadcasting brands in the world, that their app on the TV and the content is not worth keeping. The actual technology is a mess. The codecs are so slow it barely loads at all. The programming isn't up to scratch. And when you think about that, Paramount v Netflix, if you'd just gone back 10 years ago and Paramount v Netflix, you go, Paramount could destroy Netflix. But here we are now, and the conversation is clear that they've 7x their profits, that they did Bridgerton and Mike. I heard it's brilliant. How could you not want to own a bit of the business that did Bridgerton? Come on. I
yeah,
mean, that's
but
the end of the.
100%. Like, as in you're talking about that, but like Paramount is a mess. Disney, Warner
Yeah,
Bros. Discovery,
yeah,
Amazon.
yeah.
I don't know if anyone knows what's going on over there. To be honest, I
Oh,
think they spent
yeah.
£1 billion on the Lord of the Rings franchise, and that was their big swing,
Did
and it was
they?
a complete miss.
I didn't even know that.
So I don't
Oh,
know. I do
I
like,
have that for Clarkson's Farm. I enjoyed Clarkson's
yeah.
Farm, and that's probably going to buy another year of it for me.
Yeah, we're just talking about Amazon and you see how deep their pockets are. Apple as well. Apple announced on Monday that they're cutting back too. They're going to be a lot tighter with budgets going forward. I think we saw that Severance. Have you seen
Yeah.
Severance?
No, don't even know what it is.
So it was one of Apple TV's big hits. But apparently the season two cost 20 million quid an episode. Now
What? Oh,
I
I did see it. Oh man, that was a senior moment. Yes, I do remember. That's the and it's your man, and there's a in the poster, the top of his head is open, and there's a
yeah,
desk in it. I did see it, and I thought it was very good, very quirky.
I know, but Jesus Christ, 20 million quid an episode. That's like a Game of
Don't
Thrones
be taking
budget.
the Lord's name in vain, Mike. What do you want us to condemn us
Sorry.
all to eternal flames? Come on, man.
But all of them, Apple, Amazon, Disney, Paramount, Warner Bros. Discovery, they
Yeah,
all have in common is that they aren't able to claw back the lead Netflix has.
yeah,
And they had intentions of doing so when money was free and everyone just wanted to see growth. But now in 2024, it just shows how insurmountable Netflix lead is in streaming. They've all burned
yeah,
billions and billions of dollars trying to catch up. And
yeah,
I'd say they're further behind than they ever were. More people watch
yeah.
Netflix in a day than watch Apple TV in a month.
Is that a fact? Isn't
Yeah.
that incredible?
Yeah, it's mad.
That's incredible. Anne Marie, who is, I think, our resident expert in all broadcasting competitors, did make a comment on a recent enough podcast about how Apple really is going for a short list of quality programs, and that's enough for them to get their $100 a year.
Yeah. And I think this isn't about quality at all. Like
Yeah.
Netflix's most popular shows are people rewatching The Office and Suits, you know? It's
Yeah, no, you're right. You're
it's
right.
just about
And it's
scale.
funny, it is about scale. If you've subscribed to all of these platforms, which regrettably we have here in this house, you eventually realize they not one is good enough. You kind of choose your favorite two, and then you should retire the rest.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right, so that's Netflix. I suppose we'll hold on for another while. Is that what else? Jesus, a long show. Are you going to give us an elevator? Sure, what? Give us an elevator
A
pitch,
very
Mike. Why
fast
not?
one because it is a long
Right, go
show.
on. Short elevator, 2 floors.
Two
Second
floors.
floor,
Yeah,
please.
yeah. So it's slightly cheeky one, but depending on your opinion on the CrowdStrike situation, it could prove interesting, and that is SentinelOne.
Hmm.
So
Oh
SentinelOne
yeah.
for a long time has been the distant second in the endpoint security market. It's a fair distance behind CrowdStrike, but if any company is set to directly capitalize on this fiasco, it's going to be SentinelOne. I'm not sure how many contracts it might actually end up stealing, but in terms of reputation, in terms of attracting new business, and just capitalizing on, say, what's coming up for grabs in the next year. You mentioned about what will make the chief security officer or the chief technical officer in a company look bad, and maybe suggesting CrowdStrike after all this will make it look bad. Who comes in second?
Hmm.
SentinelOne.
Hmm.
So it's got a lot of potential in the near term. Not to make this show political, but could you call it the Kamala Harris of the cybersecurity world right now? Do you know? Just kind of walks in and gets a lot of credit for
You're
not
breaking all the
being
rules. We're not allowed to
not
talk
being
about God, and we're not allowed to talk about anyone who does anything in politics.
a,
That's our.
it's like, but it's like no one really wanted it, but it's a lot better than the mess that was just left behind.
Yeah,
Do you know what I
yeah,
mean?
right. I
So
hear you. That's the political. I hear you.
yeah. Okay. So that's SentinelOne. Obviously, before diving in, the word of warning: it's not profitable, and revenue is decelerating quite fast. It's still growing at 40% a year, but it was
Wow,
in
you had us at deceleration. What are you talking about?
it was it was growing in the triple digits for 21, 22, and 23, and then over the
Hmm.
last year it's dropped significantly. Stock is well down from all-time highs, which it hit back in 2021 just after its IPO. It's incredibly volatile stock, but could prove to be an opportunistic pick, at least in the short term. So that's
You
Sentinel
should
One.
describe the shape of the graph next time, Mike. The listeners love when I do that.
Oh, I don't know.
What's its market cap? How big is it?
Market cap, it's only about 8 billion quid, I think.
Right.
Yeah, so it's like a
There
tenth
you
the
have it,
size of
folks.
CrowdStrike.
A decelerating, an
The
unprofitable
company's
decelerating business.
steadily declining, losing money, and growing profits much
What
slower than
more
it
could
did
you ask
last year.
for? Uh-huh. All right. Okay, Mike. Well, there you have it.
Okay, yeah, Emmett, thank you as always. That was a fun show. And thank you everyone for listening. And that's it for today's episode of Stock Club. Remember to get 20% off any of our products. Just use the code StockClub20 at checkout. That offer is across the board. So Invest Plus, Horizon Annual, Horizon Monthly, Nexus Annual, Nexus Monthly, the Horizon Nexus Bundle, 20% off for all our products. Just use the code StockClub20. Thanks for joining us today, and we will talk to you next week.